The Olmec civilization. The Olmec were the first major civilization in Mesoamerica. Then they just suddenly disappeared. Along Mexico's humid Gulf Coast, sometime between 1500 and 400 BCE, a people we barely understand laid the groundwork for everything that came after in ancient Mesoamerica. They carved these massive stone heads out of volcanic basalt. 40 tons, some of them. These serene, impossible-to-read faces that still sit there today. They worked jade, built ceremonial centers, came up with ideas that the Maya and Aztecs would still be using 1,000 years later. We call them the Olmec. That's not what they called themselves. We named them that long after they were gone. Their real name, their stories, their gods? We don't know any of it. At San Lorenzo and La Venta, they built platforms, pyramids, plazas, all lined up with the stars and planets. They might have created the first writing system in the Americas. Maybe the first calendar, too. They traded jade from mountain sources, obsidian from who knows where, built a whole network across Mesoamerica. For centuries, they were the center of everything, the mother culture that everyone else borrowed from. Then the rivers shifted. Studies of sediment layers show the Coatzacoalcos and San Juan rivers changed course around 900 BCE. Floodplains became swamps, farming got harder, earthquakes hit, storms reshaped everything. Trade routes moved inland. New powers started rising, the Zapotec in Oaxaca, early Maya in the Yucatan, whoever was building Teotihuacan in the highlands. The Olmec world started shrinking. Someone toppled those massive heads, or buried them again. Sacred sites got sealed off, maybe as part of some ritual, maybe violently. Hard to say. By 400 BCE, La Venta went dark. The great mounds were sealed, monuments defaced. No one wrote down why. Could have been natural disaster. Could have been rebellion. Could have been deliberate. A civilization that decided to bury its own memory before walking away. But their influence? That didn't die. The rain gods, the maize gods, the jaguar imagery, it all shows up again in later cultures. Their symbols reappear in temples built hundreds of miles away. Their legacy survived, even though their names didn't. The Indus Valley Civilization. This empire built the first cities advanced beyond their time. Then, as if they never existed, they vanished. Not even their language survived. What wiped them out so completely? 5,000 years ago, along the wide plains of the Indus River, something extraordinary was taking shape. Dozens of settlements spread across what's now Pakistan and northwest India began to hum with life. The people of the Indus built systems where streets ran in perfect grids and drains were neatly covered. Every home was connected to a larger network of sanitation. There were no kings or temples towering above the rest, nor were there monuments to individual power. Yet everything ran with precision. It was order without visible hierarchy. Trade goods, beads, shells, cotton, copper, traveled hundreds of miles to the ports of the Arabian Sea. In their seal carvings, we see the outline of a people who believed in balance, in regulation, in quiet sophistication. But their perfection hit a limit, and by around 1900 BCE, small signs of strain began to appear. The great Indus River, being their lifeline, began to shift course. Sediment records from lakes in the region show long, punishing droughts creeping across the plains. The rains grew erratic, crops failed in cycles. The same river system that had given them everything began to betray them. Trade, once their heartbeat, slowed down. Ships no longer reached Mesopotamia. Their once polished pottery became rough, unrefined. In the cities of Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa, drains clogged. Streets fell into disrepair. By 1700 BCE, it was over. The cities stood hollow. Their script, still undeciphered today, vanished from use. Bricks from great buildings were carried off to build rural huts. The people drifted east, following new rivers, starting over in smaller communities. The world's first great urban experiment simply dissolved, quietly, completely. They had mastered sanitation before Rome and organized cities before Athens. But they couldn't master their river. And that's what makes their disappearance so haunting. They weren't destroyed by war or conquest. They were undone by the slow turning of nature. and by their own dependence on stability. The Rapa Nui. In the middle of the Pacific, over 3,500 kilometers from the nearest continent, there's Rapa Nui, Easter Island. Around 1200 CE, Polynesian voyagers showed up in double-hulled canoes with crops, chickens, and this incredible vision. Over generations, they carved hundreds of moai, those towering stone figures with the solemn faces. Some weigh over 80 tons. Each one represented ancestors watching over the land, connection between the living and the spirits of their chiefs. These weren't just art. They were everything, proof of unity, identity, competition between clans. Moving them required ropes, logs, and ridiculous amounts of human effort. But the island's palm forests paid the price. Every tree cut for a statue meant one less for canoes, tools protecting the soil. The land started changing, soil eroded, birds vanished, crops struggled against the wind. By the 1600s, things got scarce, rivalries intensified. Those moai, once sources of pride, got pulled down in anger. Rituals shifted toward survival. When Europeans showed up in 1722, the islanders had adapted to a harder life. Smaller gardens, stone shelters, new beliefs built around endurance rather than monuments. Then came the real disasters. Slave raids from Peru, diseases from ships. By the 19th century, barely anyone was left. But recent research shows a more complicated story. The Rapa Nui didn't just self-destruct. They adapted, changed crops, tools, traditions, to survive as long as the island could support them. The Cucuteni Tripilia culture. In what's now Romania, Moldova, and Ukraine, there was this ancient culture that thrived way before Egypt's pyramids or anything in Sumer. Between 5400 and 2700 BCE, the Cucuteni Tripilia people built settlements that shouldn't have been possible for their time. Some of these places covered hundreds of acres, housed up to 15,000 people, the biggest human communities anywhere on Earth before the Bronze Age. They built in spirals, concentric circles, houses arranged like ripples spreading out from some sacred center. Their pottery had these swirling red and black designs, symbols about life, death, starting over. Little figurines of women, animals, fertility gods filled their homes. Everything pointed to a culture obsessed with ritual and cycles, and then they'd burn it all down. Archaeologists have found hundreds of these sites. Same pattern every time. Entire villages deliberately set on fire, walls baked into brick from the heat. Controlled, systematic, almost ceremonial. This wasn't enemy destruction. They did this to themselves. Some researchers think it was about renewal, like cleanse everything and rebuild from the ashes. Others point to crisis. Resources running out, forests disappearing, social breakdown as populations grew too fast. And there was pressure from the east. Steppe herders, ancestors of Indo-European peoples, pushing westward. Conflict, cultural mixing. By 2700 BCE, those spiral towns were empty. The painted vessels, the goddess figurines, the symbols that looked almost like writing, all of it stopped. What replaced them? Smaller villages, simpler pottery, a whole different way of living that didn't involve building or burning on that scale anymore. They left no written records. Those symbols on their pottery, they look like writing, but we can't read them. Why they chose to end their own cities, we'll never know. Burning your world on purpose is weird, right? It's destruction and control at the same time, like saying nothing lasts, and maybe nothing should. The Minoan civilization. On the island of Crete more than 4,000 years ago, a civilization flourished that seemed almost impossible. The Minoans, named for the legendary king Minos, rose from the Aegean like a beacon of trade and art. Between 2000 and 1450 BCE, their palaces dominated the island. Knossos, Phaistos, Malea, vast labyrinths of corridors and courtyards, walls covered with vivid frescoes of dolphins, dancers, and bulls. Their writing system, Linear A, still defies translation. They had no great armies, no monuments to conquest, only the confidence of those who ruled through trade. Their fleets crossed the Aegean, carrying olive oil, wine, and fine pottery to Egypt and Anatolia. At sea they were unrivaled. At home their cities thrived without fortifications. It was as if they believed the sea itself protected them. Then the earth shifted. Around 1600 BCE, the volcano on the island of Thera, today's Santorini, erupted with the force of 1,000 atomic bombs. The sky darkened for weeks. Ash fell like winter across the Mediterranean. Tsunamis tore into Crete's northern coast, flattening ports and farmlands. The disaster didn't end them immediately, but it fractured the foundation of their world. Trade routes collapsed. Fields lay buried in ash. Famine and unrest followed. The palaces were rebuilt, but smaller, poorer, less intricate. The artistry dulled. The old confidence was gone. For a century, they still stood, and then came the final blow. Around 1450 BCE, the rising Mycenaean Greeks from the mainland arrived. Their weapons and influence swept across Crete. Linear A disappeared forever, replaced by the Mycenaean script, Linear B. They worshipped the bull, the double axe, and the sea, symbols of power and renewal. In the end, each became their undoing. The sea turned on them. The earth erupted beneath them. Even their myths became warnings. The Maya civilization. In the 9th century, they left their cities in the jungle. The temples remained, but the priests did not. What could have happened to them? For nearly 2,000 years, the Maya shaped the jungles of Central America into one of the most advanced civilizations on Earth. Tikal, Palenque, Copan were kingdoms of engineers, priests, and astronomers. Each temple aligned with the heavens, each pyramid shadow marking the rhythm of time itself. At its height, Tikal rivaled Rome in scale and complexity, but in the 9th century something changed. Within a few generations, the great cities of the southern lowlands began to empty. Temples suddenly became empty. Altars, once crowded with offerings, were abandoned. Why did they leave? Hieroglyphic carvings tell part of the story. After the year 889, the record of royal inscriptions stops. No new stelae were raised. Clues could also be taken from the soil. Pollen samples from lake beds show vast deforestation. The Maya had cleared the jungle to feed millions, and in doing so, stripped away their own shield against drought. Then the rains stopped. A series of mega-droughts hit the region, lasting decades at a time. Crops failed, reservoirs dried up. As scarcity grew, kingdoms turned inward. Rivals fought over what little remained. Monuments from this era show rulers proclaiming new victories, desperate attempts to project power as their world fractured. Elites demanded more tribute, even as harvests shrank. The people fled. By around 950 CE, it was over. Copan, Palenque, and Calakmul all became silent. Only the northern cities, like Chichen Itza, carried the legacy forward for a short while longer before even they declined. The Maya may not have truly vanished totally, because their descendants still live across the region today. But their great urban centers did. Their calendar continued to mark time. They could measure the orbit of Venus to the day. They could predict eclipses centuries in advance. But none of that knowledge could save them from the collapse of the world around them. The Nabateans. In the deserts of southern Jordan, a hidden city once shimmered with life. From the 4th century BCE, the Nabateans rose from nomads to masters of the trade routes that stitched Arabia to the Mediterranean. Their wealth came not from conquest, but from control. Frankincense, myrrh, and spices, the lifeblood of ancient commerce, passed through their hands. Every caravan that crossed the desert paid tribute at their gates, and at the center of it all stood Petra. Petra wasn't just a city. It was an oasis carved into the living rock with palaces, tombs, and temples hewn from red sandstone cliffs. Its engineers captured every drop of rain with channels and cisterns, turning the barren desert into a garden of wealth. Travelers described its facades as glowing like embers at sunset. But power built on trade is as fragile as the roads that feed it. By the 1st century BCE, Rome had turned its eyes toward the east. The empire wanted control of the incense routes and the taxes that came with them. At first, the Nabateans played along, adapting to Roman politics while keeping their autonomy. Yet their grip began to slip. New sea routes through Egypt allowed ships to bypass the desert entirely. Caravans grew fewer. Taxes fell. The flow that sustained Petra slowed to a trickle, and when Rome finally absorbed the Nabatean kingdom in 106 CE, their independence ended with barely a fight. For a time, Petra remained a provincial outpost, its columns still gleaming under Roman rule, but without trade, its heart withered. A series of earthquakes in the 4th and 5th centuries shattered its water systems and toppled its temples. The merchants left. The desert crept back in. By the 6th century, the city that once ruled the sands was a ghost. Its last inscriptions fade around this time. Centuries later, Bedouins kept its memory alive in whispers, a place of the ancients hidden from outsiders. It wasn't until the early 19th century that Western explorers stumbled upon it again, half-buried and silent, its stone faces staring out at nothing. The Khmer Empire. Angkor was this vast kingdom built on controlling water. Then water destroyed them. How did centuries of prosperity end in complete silence? In Southeast Asia's heart, from the 9th to 15th century, the Khmer Empire rose from the Tonle Sap floodplains. They reshaped the entire landscape. Reservoirs, canals, embankments everywhere. A living machine designed to tame the monsoon. At the center was Angkor, the largest pre-industrial city on Earth. Stone temples like Angkor Wat, Bayon Ta Prohm, built to mirror the cosmos in perfect alignment, each tower representing a mountain, each moat an ocean. From above, the city went on for hundreds of square kilometers, roads, rice fields, waterworks stretching to the horizon. But the system that kept them alive, that's what killed them. Tree ring data and sediment records show the climate went haywire. Decades of drought, then catastrophic floods. When the rains finally came back, they came back hard. Canals burst, reservoirs filled with silt. The hydraulic system, Angkor's lifeline, started falling apart. As irrigation failed, trade shifted. Maritime commerce through coastal ports like Ayutthaya and Malacca pulled wealth away from the inland empire. Foreign invasions tested the borders. In 1431, Ayutthayan armies reached Angkor's gates. The royal court fled south to Phnom Penh. No one ever rebuilt the great city. The jungle came back. Temples became monuments to human ambition and its limits. Centuries later, explorers found them covered in roots, walls split but still standing, like nature had just absorbed the whole kingdom. They mastered water until water mastered them. Those canals, once symbols of order, became pathways of decay. The ancestral Puebloans. Between 900 and 1150 CE, in the vast deserts of the American Southwest, a civilization rose where few thought life could thrive. The ancestral Puebloans, often called the Anasazi, carved out their world. In Chaco Canyon, they built great houses with hundreds of rooms stacked 3 and 4 stories high. Some were aligned with the solstices, others connected by roads that ran arrow-straight for miles, cutting through desert and mesa as if drawn with a ruler. Each settlement was part of a vast network, a web of trade, ceremony, and shared belief. There were no kings, written records, or even armies, yet their coordination rivaled any ancient empire. Corn, pottery, turquoise, and macaw feathers moved along routes linking Chaco to distant lands. It was a civilization held together by cooperation. Then the climate shifted. Around 1130 CE, growth slowed to nothing. Rain stopped for years at a time. The mega-drought stretched for half a century. Reservoirs dried, crops failed. Communities once bound by trade began to scatter. Archaeologists find signs of tension, hastily built walls, mass burials, evidence of conflict not from invaders but from within. The drought was both environmental and social. Villages perched higher and higher on cliffs, harder to reach, easier to defend. Their only survival became migration. Families moved east, west, and south in search of rain. By 1300 CE, Chaco Canyon was empty. Wind replaced their voices. Their descendants live on as the Hopi, the Zuni, and others across the southwest. The Clovis culture. A long time ago, the Clovis people lived at the edge of an ice-covered world. They hunted mammoth, mastodon, giant bison across a continent still recovering from the last ice age. From Alaska to Florida, their signature were the elegant fluted spear points carved with precision that even modern experts admire. For centuries they did well, adapted to changing plains and forests, built a life around mobility, skill, deep knowledge of the land. Then, almost overnight, we didn't find them anymore. The tools stopped showing up. The mammoths are extinct. The Clovis disappear from the record. Around 2800 BCE, the climate suddenly got colder. Scientists call it the Younger Dryas. Glaciers advanced. Grasslands turned to tundra. Megafauna, already stressed from hunting, collapsed. Some researchers think a comet hit. Others say it was just Earth's natural climate shifts catching everything off guard. Either way, the result was the same. The world the Clovis knew ended. Their descendants carried pieces forward, new tools, new names, new languages, through thousands of years of adaptation.